All right, everyone, welcome to the OPI API work group meeting. I can see, as we were just talking before we started the recording, there's just a few of us on the call today. I only have one brief thing to go over. I'll share it real quickly here. We have gotten the base port functionality merged in finally. It's been out in review for a couple months. We finally got a little bit of feedback that it was fine at this stage. So basically, we've got 3 protobufs. We've got the network interfaces protobuf. We've got the network Ethernet protobuf and the VLAN protobuf started and put into place. We need to expand now and start moving up into layer 2. And as this continues to progress, we can make changes or updates or adjustments to this, add additional parameters, etc. So this will start to help allow us to build the foundation, at least at the interface layer and the port layer. We can build our way up from that and start adding additional parameters. This has been out there since right around the middle of March for review. But we got it through at least an initial review, got an okay on it, and so we've gone ahead and got this merged in. So if you want to start leveraging it or making comments to it or changes to it, it is out there and put into the system. So now the next step will be to start building up all the layer 2 related functionality, starting to think about bridging, all the different parameters that we may need in VLANs in addition to this, etc. So that's where things stand related to that. I just thought I'd give
So
that
this is just a gRPC spec, so it still needs a bridge or an implementation, correct?
Yes, this still does need an implementation to go with it. I've started on one, but I only have a few cycles that I can contribute to it right now. So at least I would share that. That is actually out there on the OPI project now. So I'll stop the share. So that was really the only topic that I had to cover this week. Again, we want to start building up from this, start putting this into the implementations. And that's where things stand related to that. Are there any other topics that we want to cover today? I know this morning we were talking about a lot of these similar things and how they need to build out, how we need to build the base layer so that we can then start looking at how we tie Kubernetes, etc. on there. But what was that, Marcia?
No. Yeah, my question was about the Kubernetes. That will be specified as a provisioning work group.
So the initial
like what firmware it's loaded on the card, how ports are configured or offloads enabled on these ports and things of this sort.
So as part of the provisioning, it's really what firmware gets loaded. There is the inventory protobuf that's here. It's already been agreed to, which kind of tells you all the BIOS information and the system information. From that, then there has to be some additional information in terms of how you would load firmware onto the platform. I know right now with Ansible scripts that there is some functionality related to loading firmware, etc. But there's other pieces that we have to do as part of provisioning, like define how many SRIOV capabilities that you're going to enable on a particular card that you put in, etc. And then that will expose however many interfaces that you may or may not want to use. And then how you would expose those interfaces. Do you keep them as here's my range of interfaces, or do I expose all of them, etc., etc. So there's a lot of things that have to be worked out from the provisioning group from that perspective. Is that what you're looking for, Marcia?
Yeah, so basically, and that will give us the port objects that we're gonna operate on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you'll have, you have both the physical and the virtual ports. So what's really defined in this set of specs right now is we've got the definition of the virtual as well as physical ports that you could set up. Typically, if you looked at a card, let's say, and all you did was just provision it, you didn't provide predefined the virtual interfaces, then what you could potentially do is if you're letting the card manage those, you would have the physical ones that would come up and say, these are fixed, they're physical interfaces. You can do some level of configuration on them and they're going to be they could be exposed up to the host if you wanted to, or then you could go in and say, I'm going to create interfaces, which is why right now in here, the next level was to add, create, and delete, which would be where you would create a virtual interface or delete a virtual interface. And that was the next level that we wanted to build up on the network interfaces type level.
Yeah, at this point, do you want to have something like an apply commit kind of thing of command that will re-trigger? I don't know, maybe even reboot the card sometimes. Sometimes when you have to delete these interfaces, some cards need a reboot or a PCIe enumeration or some more drastic action.
Yep, and that's going to be the tricky thing to try to figure out is, do we have to do reboots across this? Or can you create a virtual interface internal to, say, the DPU or IPU and hold it there, not have it exposed to the host, and then can you dynamically expose it to the host without doing a reboot?
No, I'm talking about only the DPU side. Host will have its own set of problems. But instead of calling it reboot, should we call it like an apply or commit, and then the implementation of apply commit does behind the scene whatever it needs to be done? Why I'm asking this, because so far we have been using, let's say, the standard, I don't know how to call it, let's say firmware, and I'm not talking about the Ubuntu running on the ARM-cores, I'm talking about the binary image running on the accelerators, let's call it. And I know like Mount Evans has a way to load a certain P4 image, same like Pensando. So beyond the default one, you could have your own firmware that exposes more functionality or less or different set of interfaces. And it will be good to basically be able to configure and specify, hey, these are the real, virtual, whatever. This is my firmware, if that is part of, and now commit, basically. And when you do commit, DPU does whatever needs to do in the implementation. So we don't necessarily call it a reboot. Maybe some will be able to do it live, some will not able to do it live.
Yeah, no, I see what you're getting at. So yeah, there may need to be an additional API
to add like a
interface.
commit in the API, yeah.
Yeah, there may need to be an additional interface in there for commit, and it may have to exist at, well, we'd have to figure out what level it would need to exist at, because would the commit only be at the network interface level, or would it be committing it all the way across the entire config, because you have preconditions across various settings that you want to have?
Because this changes the API design a bit, because in one design you can have each command, I don't know, set IP on the interface, and that sets it there, or you can do set IP, set gateway, set mask, set blah, 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 for which they are not active yet. And then when you do commit, it pushes all 4 or 5, whatever, together in order to create a consistent. And that changes a bit, I think, the API design, if it's like a commit base or each command gets applied when it's being issued.
Right. No, understood. So that's
And-
something that we'll have to talk about in terms of
Okay.
the interface. Well, that would be within the underlying code that would be developed, but yes, do we need to add the commit type of interface to the API? That's the bigger question. So that's something that we should
Yes.
consider as an option out there. That's a good point. Okay. No, good discussion, a good point you raised there. The other question would be, is that something that would be needed in, say, a Kubernetes environment? Will we need a commit? Or is it really just the underlying framework? But regardless, it may be something that's needed.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting. It may be needed at the implementation layer, but from a Kubernetes perspective, you'd typically define the target state you want, and so it would be more declarative.
Right.
So, but behind that, implementing something, yeah, you probably still want transactional semantics, that you've got predictable behavior.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good point. So we'll make the note that we need to look at the transactional aspect of, you know, a commit for activating or setting the actual configuration that you're pushing down from the API. Okay. I'll put that in the notes I publish. All right.
Because not having it good result, like you add interface one and you issue that command, and then card goes through the motion of rebooting, reconfiguring, you wait for 3 minutes, then you add interface 2 and again start it over when you can just do 1 to 3 interfaces and then hey, go apply or load or whatever the API we decide to be named.
Yep. Yeah, that's very true, because you'd be cycling yourself repeatedly every time you brought one up. Okay. Good point. Thanks, Marcia. Anything else that we want to cover today?
Yeah,
like I
if
said,
we want, do we
go ahead.
want, and maybe this is not API related, maybe this I need to bring in TSA as well. Do we want OPI to have any spec or API towards the host, or we just should say host should support PCIe, hot swap, and operating system should support PCIe remuneration or whatever hot swaps. I think the hardware and the software basically to both support it. And on the host, all you have to do after you configure the DPU is to trigger PCIe remuneration or something from the host. Or we're not going to specify anything, or we're just going to say, no, once you do this commit, you have to reboot the host. Kind of what will be the OPI requirement on the test?
Yeah, we will
require hot swap support on host OS and host server, or no, just trigger a reboot and let it be.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussions in the provisioning group in terms of how some of that would need to work. And the question would be, when we start making the changes that would affect the PCI interface, what action needs to be taken, right? So it's, and I'm thinking out loud here, but it's on the order of, there's probably a couple of ways that it could be implemented. How the implementation would work and whether or not you need to do a reboot or you can do it in a hot swap fashion would be in some aspects vendor dependent. But I think from the standpoint of OPI, it should be specified. And I would think from our perspective, it would be better for it to be hot swappable from the standpoint of the PCI bus and the interfaces that you might want to dynamically provision. I'm not saying hot swapping the card itself, but more of bringing, interfaces online or taking them down. You probably want that to be in a more of a hot swap type operation. I'll make a note that this should be somewhere in the spec.
Just because when we play with these ports and virtual ports, we'll have to trigger that event towards the host.
Right.
And actually, does OPA even want to handle that, let's say for release 1.2, or it just will document it and say, hey, once you did this, you have to take care of the host.
Mm-hmm. No, agreed. It's another really good point. So I'll make a note of that one also. That's probably something that we may need to bring up to the TSC. And then of course it may have to circle around through provisioning or, through the vendors to get some feedback from the vendors on that. That's a good point. Okay. Anything else beyond what some of the things that were discussed in the TSC this morning?
No, not for me.
Okay. And Marcia, we still need to get the PyDPU update published. Is that correct? I don't know that that's happened.
Boris said I can do it, but he never said I done it.
Okay. All right. I'll circle with Boris and see if he's done it or not, and I can find that one out. Okay. Any other topics? Other than that, I'll let everyone go. Give you back 35 minutes of your day.
Nothing from me.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll meet again in a couple weeks. All right. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.